In this video, we will tell the story of an abandoned ship that was turned into a ghost ship that drifted for years in the Atlantic Ocean. Stay tuned as we unfurl the sail of this captivating narrative, navigating the dark waters of intrigue and suspense. Prepare to be riveted as we journey together into the unknown, following the eerie wake of this mythical ghost ship. Let's learn a little more about our protagonist. Governor Parr, as the ship was called, was a 200-foot wooden schooner with 4 imposing masts and a net tonnage of 912 tons. She was built in 1918 at the prestigious W.R. Huntley and Amp. Sons shipyards in Nova Scotia, Canada. The schooner was commissioned by Archie F. Davidson of Bridgewater. She was a magnificent schooner, with her gleaming white hull and portly foremasts. She was undoubtedly one of the most beautiful schooners built in Atlantic Canada. The Governor Parr was the last schooner built in Parrsboro. The vessel was named Governor Parr, in honor of the first governor of Nova Scotia. In 1921, she changed ownership and became the property of V.C. Henschel. With the new owner, she would also change the port of registry, changing the port of Parrsboro, Nova Scotia, for Bridgetown, Barbados. The schooner Governor Parr was preparing for her final voyage. On September 27, 1923, loaded with over 1 million feet of lumber board, she set sail from Ingrimport, Nova Scotia, under the command of Captain A.D. Richards. The Governor Parr's destination port was Buenos Aires, Argentina. That day would be the last time the schooner would be in port. A few days into her voyage, some 800 miles east of Boston and 700 miles south of Newfoundland, according to various sources, Governor Parr encountered a relentless storm that would cause considerable damages, among them the loss of the mizzen mast with all its sails. But the Governor Parr would not be the only one damaged. The captain and 1 sailor lost their lives during the storm. The crew found themselves in a difficult situation, without a captain, with the ship damaged and heavily laden. Faced with this situation, the crew decided to lower the lifeboats and abandon the ship, convinced that the schooner would break in two and sink. With its valuable cargo, the Governor Parr was at the mercy of the Atlantic Ocean. On October 3, 1923, the USS Shodak would rescue the crew. By this time, the crew assumed that the storm would have hit Governor Parr, and she would have sunk. On October 8, 5 days after being abandoned, at about 10 o'clock at night, the Majestic, of the Cunard Lines, sighted a ghostly ship, uncrewed and with rickety sails, floating in the ocean like a specter in the middle of the night. It was the Governor Parr. In early November, the ship Saxonia saw a schooner appear adrift, without a mast, torn sails, and no one aboard. That ship was the Governor Parr. Fascinated and somewhat frightened by the schooner's ghostly appearance, the captain of the Saxonia ordered to board Governor Parr and sent a small group of sailors in a dinghy to investigate the ship. The sailors were surprised because despite missing a mast, being flooded with water, and the sails destroyed, the hull appeared in fairly good condition, still having 3 masts in an acceptable state. The expedition of sailors returned, and the Saxonia continued its voyage, leaving Governor Parr behind. The schooner continued drifting, wandering through the Atlantic, at the mercy of the wind and currents. Governor Parr would be sighted up to 6 times over the next 2 months. The rumor of a large schooner drifting across the ocean spread like wildfire. Ocean currents placed the Governor Parr in the middle of the North Atlantic trade routes, making the ship a navigation hazard. In mid-December, the U.S. Coast Guard decided to send the Seneca, one of 2 Coast Guard cutters assigned to sink and tow derelicts. The ship departs from New York with the mission to locate and sink the Governor Parr. A few days later, while heading towards the area of the schooner's last sighting, a strong storm crosses its path, forcing the Seneca to turn back and return to port. Deviating from the history of our protagonist's schooner, it must be said that the Seneca is a ship with an amazing history. She was torpedoed during the First World War by German submarines and was the ship that captured the rum runner William McCoy. But we will tell her story another time. At the end of December 1923, the United States Coast Guard decided to make a second attempt, and they sent the Tampa Coast Guard cutter. On December 26, the Tampa left New York Harbor to search for Governor Parr and tow her back to port, as the schooner was a severe navigation hazard. The ship located the Governor Parr on January 1, 1924, about 300 miles east of where she was abandoned. After a few unsuccessful attempts, on January 2, the Coast Guard cutter hooked and began towing Governor Parr into Halifax Harbor. But, again, adverse weather conditions appear, and a big storm hits the Tampa and the Governor Parr. The heavy swell forced the tugboat to cut the tow line to sail safely. If Tampa continued towing the heavy schooner, which still had all its cargo, the Tampa risked sinking. In addition, Tampa was low on fuel, due to the high consumption of her engines when towing the schooner in those conditions. If Tampa continued to tow her, she would not have enough fuel to reach port. The Governor Parr was once again wandering around the Atlantic Ocean. About 6 weeks later, in mid-February, she was sighted by an American freighter, some 300 miles further east of the last known position. In March, the Cunard Line's Majestic met Governor Parr for the second time. This time in broad daylight, about 300 miles from the American continent. The Governor Parr was in the middle of the trade routes between Europe and North America, with the danger to navigation that this implied. How many ships would pass close to the schooner at night or in heavy fog without knowing that the derelict was there? In June 1924, she would be sighted again by the steamer SS Olin, reporting that the ship's hull was apparently in good condition, still preserving the bowsprit, the anchors, and the deckhouse, with the hull floating on an even keel. She had drifted to the southeast, towards the coast of Portugal, and had got into the path of ships coming north from the Canaries. Faced with the danger to navigation, Portugal hired a tugboat from Lisbon to find and tow the Governor Parr to port. Perhaps forewarned by the failure of the 2 previous U.S. Coast Guard missions, the tug was contracted under no cure, no pay terms, a Lloyd's standard form of salvage agreement. In other words, the towboat company would only be paid if the mission was successfully completed. The tug left Lisbon, and a few days later, when it was close to the area where the schooner had last been sighted, a gale forced the tug to turn back and return to Lisbon Harbor. Another storm impeded the Governor Parr rescue, and the story repeated itself like the chorus of a song. Governor Parr kept drifting, pushed by the currents. A few days later, in mid-July 1924, she was sighted near the Canary Islands. On August 8, the British steamer Zaria sighted the Governor Parr off Cape Blanco, on the Atlantic coast of North Africa. The captain of the Zaria stopped the ship and sent a group of sailors in a dinghy to board the schooner. The ship was flooded with water, floating with the hull half sunk, and the wood it was carrying had swollen, generating such pressure that it had split parts of the deck. After seeing the state of the Governor Parr and considering it a serious navigation hazard, the captain of the Zaria decided to finish off the schooner. They sent from the Zaria a boat with 2 barrels of paraffin to start a fire that would eventually sink Governor Parr. The crew of the Zaria used the 2 barrels of paraffin to light 2 fires, one in the forecastle and the other in the center of the schooner. Fueled by paraffin, the fire spread across Governor Parr, burning with great flames. But the Zaria did not wait to see it sink. When they saw it engulfed in flames, the captain decided to continue its voyage, assuming it would burn to the waterline and sink. On August 11th, the crew of the Umtali sighted her burning slowly, with practically no flames. The unsinkable Governor Parr remained afloat. 2 days later, on August 13th, the crew aboard the Iberia sighted her, now without fire. Floating with the entire deck and part of the hull disintegrated by flames. The last confirmed sighting was in October 1924 off the African coast. An article published on September 9, 1925, stated, "If the Governor Parr has continued to remain afloat, men conversant with oceanic conditions believe she would likely be carried by the northeast trade winds and the north equatorial current across the tropical North Atlantic, and probably will be next sighted near the Lesser Antilles." But naval men point out that these are hard to sight. Often derelicts are mistaken for porpoises, and some of the forsaken craft turn turtle, their hulls being covered with barnacles and seaweed, giving them the color of the sea. A year later, in October 1925, the British steamer Tortuguero sighted a derelict, 300 miles northeast of the Virgin Islands, suggesting that it could be the Governor Parr. However, due to the deteriorated condition of the derelict, it was very difficult to confirm its identity. The press said, "The British steamer Tortuguero late in July sighted a derelict 300 miles northeast of the Virgin Islands." If this proves to be the Governor Parr, which seems likely, it will be the first derelict on record in the Hydrographic Office to practically cover the circulatory drift of the North Atlantic. Since then, there has been no further news of the Governor Parr. Who knows if part of her hull or wooden planks from her cargo is still floating in the ocean, circulating on the highways of the ocean currents.